What if I told you that the biggest change in modern golf didn't begin with Rory McIlroy, Tiger Woods, or even LIV Golf? It began with a man who had never hit a shot on the PGA Tour. A former NFL executive walked into professional golf with one goal: rebuild the sport from the ground up. Within months, secret meetings were underway. Golf's most powerful players were sitting behind closed doors. And while fans were focused on the rivalry between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, an even bigger transformation was quietly taking shape. At the center of it all stood Brian Rolapp. And the man helping him shape golf's future wasn't standing in front of cameras. It was Tiger Woods. Looks like that came through as an echo of my last message. Happy to just go ahead and get started on it. In June 2025, the PGA Tour hired Brian Rolapp as its first-ever chief executive officer. He arrived after a 22-year career with the NFL, most recently serving as the league's executive vice president, chief media and business officer. At his introductory press conference at the Travelers Championship, Rolapp laid out exactly what he intended to bring from professional football into professional golf. "I think there's three things, as I've mentioned before, that we can take from the NFL that I think applies to golf," said Rolapp. "One is you sort of relentlessly focus on the game, getting the competition right. Getting the highest level of competition is extremely important. That's something we obsessed about." He continued, "And I think third is a constant mindset of innovation. You have to change, where it makes sense to change, we're going to do that." Commissioner Jay Monahan, who had led the tour for a decade, announced he would step down at the end of 2026, handing day-to-day operations to Rolapp during the transition. "A year ago, I informed our boards that upon completing a decade as commissioner, I would step down from my role at the end of 2026, Monahan said in a statement. "We found exactly the right leader in Brian Rolapp." Rolapp's mandate was not subtle. Within 2 months of taking the job, at the 2025 Tour Championship in Atlanta, he made his first major structural move. He announced the creation of a 9-member body called the Future Competition Committee, tasked with what he called a holistic relook of how we compete on the tour. Rolapp said the committee's goal is a holistic relook of how we compete on the tour, and will focus on both the regular season, playoffs and off-season. He added, "We're going to focus on the evolution of our competitive model and the corresponding media products and sponsorship elements and model of the entire sport." 6 players and 3 business executives filled out the committee. The players were Patrick Cantlay, Adam Scott, Camilo Villegas, Maverick McNeely, and Keith Mitchell, all current or incoming members of the Tour's Policy Board or Player Advisory Council. The 3 outside advisors were Joe Gorder, chairman of both the Policy Board and the PGA Tour Enterprises Board, John Henry, manager of Strategic Sports Group, and Theo Epstein, the former Major League Baseball executive credited with helping drive changes like the pitch clock, now serving as an advisor to Fenway Sports Group. And chairing the entire committee was Tiger Woods. The announcement carried weight instantly, not because Woods was expected to rubber stamp anything, but because of what his presence signaled. He already sat on both the Policy Board and the Enterprises Board. Now he would run the body directly responsible for redesigning the competitive model that governs every player on tour. Woods reacted publicly within hours, posting on X, "Honored to serve as chairman of the Future Competition Committee. This is about shaping the next era of the PGA Tour, for our fans, players, and partners. Thanks to Brian Rolapp for his vision and leadership, and grateful to the committee members for their willingness to participate." Patrick Cantlay later revealed exactly how casually his own appointment came together. Asked in a press conference why he joined, Cantlay said simply, "Tiger asked me to be on the committee, so I said yes." Cantlay also offered an early read on Rolapp himself. "I've been very impressed. I think he's very sharp, and you can tell that he cares a lot and cares about learning what the PGA Tour is about." For months, the committee worked largely out of public view. By December 2025, at the Hero World Challenge, Woods gave one of his first substantive updates. He confirmed the committee had already met 3 times since forming in August, though members were in daily contact. Woods was light on specifics, noting they've torn down and looked at so many different models for the schedule and are still in that process. He described the guiding principles Rolapp had set: parity, scarcity, and simplicity. Woods said, "We're working with all of our partners to create the best schedule and product to deliver all that in 27 is something we're trying to do. I don't know if we can get there, I don't know if we will get there, but that's what we're trying to do." The stated ambition was for a 2027 rollout. That timeline would eventually slip by an entire year. While the committee worked quietly, the loudest public voice of concern belonged to Rory McIlroy. Throughout 2026, McIlroy repeatedly raised alarms about the direction the tour appeared to be heading, particularly around a proposed two-track promotion and relegation system. In June 2026, at the Memorial Tournament, Rolapp confirmed that details of the model were still being hashed out with the committee and the Player Advisory Council, but that momentum was building toward an announcement later that summer. McIlroy's response was direct: the old ways of the PGA Tour weren't actually that bad. He was not alone in that skepticism. Jack Nicklaus, the 18-time major champion, voiced his own reservations at the same event. "I don't want to comment on the tour's schedule because I'm not exactly in favor of what they're doing right now," Nicklaus said. The early proposal under discussion described a Track 1 that might include 15 to 18 tour events, plus the 4 majors and the Players' Championship, with roughly 20 to 30 promotion spots available per season from Track 2, not including 10 golfers who would move up from the DP World Tour. Golfers competing in Track 2 would compete to be elevated to Track 1 the next season. McIlroy's concerns extended beyond the structure itself into specific tournaments. He worried about the fate of National Open championships caught inside the new tier system. McIlroy believes the events would become a farce if they are not true to their traditions as Opens, referring to events like the Canadian Open and the Scottish Open. Even as he backed the broader direction of the reform, he pushed tour leadership to slow down on specific details, telling bosses to be careful with the traditions those tournaments carried. At the same time, McIlroy's own relationship with the tour's existing rules was under scrutiny. Tour regulations required members to make at least 15 starts per season. By mid-2026, McIlroy was on pace to fall one event short of that threshold, having skipped tournaments including the RBC Heritage, the Cadillac Championship, and the Travelers Championship. He acknowledged the situation directly. "They know," he said, referring to the tour, describing himself as being in constant dialogue with officials over the shortfall. He explained his broader mindset: "I've been doing this a long time. I've been on tour more than half of my life at this point. So I'll pick and choose my spots like I have been doing sort of the last 18 months to 2 years. He continued, addressing the cost to his own season-long standing. "Does it mean it makes it harder for myself to win the FedEx Cup or whatever the season-long title race is going to be called? Absolutely. But I'm okay with that because it brings balance to my life and lets me enjoy things outside of the game." That stance drew criticism from fans who remembered McIlroy as one of the tour's most consistent defenders during its war with LIV Golf. Golf commentators noted the apparent contradiction: a player who once argued the tour's biggest stars needed to compete together more often was now visibly prioritizing rest over full participation. One frequently cited public reaction captured the sentiment. Fans accused him of applying different standards depending on whether the rules served his own interests. McIlroy had also, by this point, stepped back from formal tour governance. He had previously served on the policy board himself before resigning that position, a move that came during the fallout of the tour's 2023 framework agreement with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. He later reflected on how that period changed his outlook on the players who left for LIV Golf. "I was maybe a little judgmental of the guys who went to LIV Golf at the start," said McIlroy. "I think it was a bit of a mistake on my part because I now realize that not everyone is in my position or in Tiger's position." He added, "I can't judge people for making that decision, so if I regret anything, it was probably being too judgmental at the start." Concerns about McIlroy's reduced schedule reached the tour's own governance structure. Peter Malnati, a player director on the policy board, was asked directly about the situation and did not hide his unease. Very concerned. "I think there is stuff in the works, and I'll leave it at that," Malnati said. Fellow player director Webb Simpson offered a more measured take, pointing to existing flexibility in tour rules. "I think it's too hard of a thing to make guys have to play. We're still a sport where you can play when you want to play. I don't know Rory's reason, but I totally get it. It's a hard thing to fix," Simpson said. While McIlroy's schedule generated headlines, the committee's actual work continued behind closed doors, and its output kept getting pushed back. What began as a 2027 target for the new competitive model slipped, and by mid-2026, Rolapp was openly acknowledging the shift. Speaking about the timeline, he explained, "There's all sorts of questions. It looks like it's more 28 just because of the complexity of not only the competitive model, but also the commercial things you need to do to actually put a new competitive model in place." Then, in late March 2026, the story took an unrelated but consequential turn. Tiger Woods, then 50 years old, was arrested on a misdemeanor DUI charge, and his public role went quiet in the immediate aftermath. The tour issued a statement addressing his situation directly, one that separated his health from his committee duties. "Tiger Woods is a legend of our sport whose impact extends far beyond his achievements on the course. But above all else, Tiger is a person, and our focus is on his health and well-being," the tour said. A spokesperson confirmed Woods would return to his chairmanship when he is ready to do so. During this period, golf analyst Brandel Chambly suggested publicly that it might be time for Woods to consider retirement altogether, given the accumulation of physical setbacks since his 2021 car crash. Woods's absence from the public did not end his role behind the scenes. It is not fully known how involved he remained in the committee's daily work during that stretch, but when he did resurface, it was in a setting that made his continued influence unmistakable. On June 23, 2026, at TPC River Highlands ahead of the Travelers Championship, Woods made his first public appearance since the arrest. He did not take questions from reporters and instead read from a prepared statement. His purpose that day was to introduce Brian Rolapp during a news conference confirming sweeping changes to the tour's competitive structure, changes built directly from the recommendations of the committee Woods had chaired. He entered a not guilty plea to the misdemeanor charges around this time as well. In his remarks, Woods framed the entire two-year process in terms bigger than any single player. It was about bringing together different perspectives, having honest, hard conversations, and thinking boldly about what is best for the game that we all love, Woods said. "It has been a privilege to work with all the committee members and especially my fellow player directors." He added a broader appeal to legacy. "We have to look forward and beyond today and over the horizon to set up the PGA Tour and our sport for the future generations of players and fans." Rolapp, standing beside him, praised the working relationship publicly. "I think having Tiger involved was a tremendous asset and a privilege," Rolapp said. That same day, the tour's two governing boards, the Policy Board and the PGA Tour Enterprises Board, formally approved the recommendations coming out of the Future Competition Committee. They also confirmed that Brian Rolapp would take over as the tour's fifth commissioner, succeeding Monahan effective January 1, 2027, while retaining his CEO title. The new structure Rolapp unveiled that day represented the most significant reorganization of the tour's competitive model in its modern history. Rather than a single tour with a shared schedule, the plan established two distinct, separated tiers, the PGA Tour Championship Series and the PGA Tour Challenger Series. Rolapp described the model's purpose in a press release: a new competitive model grounded in meritocracy, with clearer pathways, higher stakes, and more consistency when the best players compete together. The Championship Series will run from roughly February through August, comprising 23 to 24 events total, including the four majors, the Players' Championship, the reimagined postseason, and either the Ryder Cup or President's Cup depending on the year. Of that total, 15 regular season events will fill the remaining schedule, with 10 already lined up at the time of announcement. Fields will be capped at approximately 120 players, with no alternate list and no sponsor exemptions, contested over 72 holes with a cut to the top 65 and ties. Every championship series event will carry a purse of at least $20 million. The postseason will be reimagined to include match play for the first time, with the season-ending Tour Championship rotating across a series of prestigious courses rather than staying fixed at one venue. The 2028 edition will also fold in the men's Olympic golf competition. Beneath that sits the Challenger Series, structured as the primary promotion pathway into the top tier. It will include at least 20 events, with fields of 144 players, also playing 72-hole stroke play with a cut, and purses of at least $4 million per event. A minimum of 20 Challenger Series players will be promoted into the Championship Series annually, with automatic promotion available to multiple event winners or major champions within a single season. On the other end, relegation will apply as well. At least 90 of the roughly 130 exempt Championship Series players will retain their eligibility the following year, while those who fall short will get a second chance through a Last Chance Series, staged in the fall. Crucially, the new model does not require Championship Series players to compete in every event on their own tier's schedule. The new model doesn't include a requirement that players must play every Championship Series event. Movement between tiers during the season itself is also blocked. The two Tour Series will have separate point lists, and players who are eligible for Championship Series events will not be allowed to play Challenger Series events. Rolapp addressed the philosophy behind the reform directly. From day one, the focus of the future competition committee has been to build the best version of the PGA Tour, and to do so in a way that reflects the voice of our players and the expectations of our fans. New markets are also part of the plan. The Tour confirmed it is evaluating cities including Boston, Denver, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle, and Washington, D.C. as potential hosts for new Championship Series events, addressing a long-standing gap. The Tour currently competes in only a handful of the largest media markets in the country, a point Rolapp had raised months earlier at his first State of the Tour address. Today, the PGA Tour competes in only 4 of the top 10 largest U.S. media markets, Rolapp said. That is an opportunity. That earlier address, delivered in March 2026 at the Tour's global headquarters in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, ahead of the Players' Championship, had already previewed much of what eventually became official. Speaking for 49 minutes and fielding 31 questions, Rolapp laid out 6 broad themes: a season running from late January to early September, larger, more consistent fields with cuts, a marquee season opening event at an iconic West Coast venue, evaluation of untapped large U.S. markets, a promotion and relegation system, and an enhanced postseason potentially incorporating match play. At the time, he was careful to note the plans were not finalized. Things are not set in stone, Rolapp emphasizes, but this is currently where the Tour is heading. The rollout of individual events for the new Championship Series began soon after the June announcement. The Travelers' Championship became the first tournament formally confirmed for the 2028 Championship Series slate. Months later, the Arnold Palmer Invitational was also confirmed, alongside news of a new tournament sponsor, Sompo, a Japanese insurance firm, which will back a new event at Silverado Resort's North Course in Napa, California, in late July 2027. Before that event is expected to shift permanently to Seattle for the following year. That new event effectively replaces the departing Rocket Classic in Detroit. By the summer of 2026, McIlroy's position on the overall reform had shifted from wariness to conditional support, even as his personal schedule concerns persisted separately. He continued voicing specific worries about how national opens like the Scottish Open and Canadian Open would be treated once the tier system took full effect, given they sit outside the guaranteed Championship Series slots. At the same time, he confirmed he intended to keep a lighter personal schedule regardless of how the restructuring played out, saying plainly that balancing his career with family life mattered more to him than maximizing his standing in whatever season-long points race replaced the FedEx Cup under the new system. Throughout this entire process, from the August 2025 committee announcement through the June 2026 board approval, Woods never publicly broke from the position that this was institutional work, not personal advocacy. Asked repeatedly about the schedule changes and his own role in shaping them, he consistently downplayed any individual credit, returning instead to language about collective process, honest conversations, hard trade-offs, and long-term thinking about the sport's future rather than any single season or player's preference. Woods also said, "This work was never about any one player or person." That framing sat somewhat apart from the public knowledge that Woods himself had recruited at least one sitting committee member directly. Cantlay's account of being personally asked to join made clear that Woods was not a passive chairman lending his name to a process run entirely by others. He was actively shaping who sat in the room making these decisions, even while describing the committee's output as something larger than himself. The final structure that emerged by the time boards approved it in June 2026 reflected input gathered over roughly 10 months of committee meetings, daily internal communication among members, and consultations that Woods himself described as reaching title sponsors, business executives, tournament directors, media partners, and players across the tour. The gap between Rolapp's original 6-theme outline in March and the finalized 2-tier model approved in June shows how much of the framework changed shape during that stretch. Targets moved from 2027 to 2028, promotion numbers were refined, and requirements around mandatory event participation were ultimately dropped from the final plan altogether, even though the original stated goal had been a more structured, consistent product for fans and partners. What began as a bold 6-point vision delivered by an incoming CEO with no prior background in golf became, by mid-2026, a heavily negotiated framework shaped by a 9-person committee that included some of the sport's most prominent current players, longtime tour insiders, and a chairman who had spent decades inside professional golf's competitive and business structure before ever sitting on this board. The 2028 season will be the first test of whether that structure delivers what Rolapp, Woods, and the rest of the committee spent nearly 2 years building.